Tonight, before sleep finds you, take a slow breath. The day is finished. Whatever was urgent an hour ago can wait a little longer. Settle into wherever you are and let your body feel its own quiet weight again. We are going to drift very slowly into the deep, slow story of life on Earth, where ancient creatures have been quietly inhabiting the planet for billions of years. This is the Circadian Institute. Every night we visit a different patient corner of the natural world, places that have been there long before us and will remain long after. Tonight we have come to the deep, slow story of ancient life. Trilobites in primordial seas, giant ferns in Carboniferous swamps, mammoths in Ice Age tundras, and patient living fossils still drifting through quiet waters today, all moving across deep time in their own unhurried ways. If you would like more nights like this, subscribing to the channel keeps them coming. Let your body settle. Feel the support beneath you. There's nothing you need to do tonight, nothing you need to remember. The ancient Earth has been turning quietly for billions of years, and tonight is simply one more quiet moment within that vast patient story. Tonight we drift into the deep, slow story of ancient life. Trilobites in primordial seas, giant ferns in Carboniferous swamps, mammoths in Ice Age tundras, and patient living fossils still continuing their ancient inheritance today, toward a kind of patience measured not in years but in hundreds of millions of years. The journey is slow on purpose. There is no part of this story that requires you to stay awake. If you fall asleep before we are finished, that is the right ending. Let the bed hold you, and let the patient ancient story begin. To begin the story of ancient life on Earth, we have to go very far back, further than dinosaurs, further than fish, further than any creature with a body or a face we might recognize. We have to go back about 3.5 billion years, to a time when the Earth itself was still young and life was barely beginning to find its first quiet way of being. The Earth in those first ages was a very different planet. The atmosphere had no oxygen, the sky was a different color, the sun was slightly cooler, the continents we know today did not yet exist. Most of the surface was covered by shallow, warm seas, dotted with small volcanic islands beneath a sky filled with constant slow weather. In these warm, shallow seas, the first life on Earth slowly emerged. The earliest organisms were single-celled, microscopic, and unbelievably simple by the standards of life today. They had no nucleus, they had no organelles, they were essentially small bags of chemistry capable of capturing energy from their environment and slowly making more of themselves. These first cells were called prokaryotes, a word that simply means before nucleus. They had no internal compartments, no specialized organelles, no complex machinery of any kind. They were the most basic kind of life that has ever existed, and yet they were enough. They were the beginning of every living thing on Earth that has come since. From these first prokaryotes, life spread slowly across the warm, shallow seas of the early Earth. They formed thin films across rocks. They drifted in clouds through the open water. They settled in mats on the seafloor, wherever there was warmth and water and the basic chemistry needed to support them. They slowly took hold. Some of these early microbial communities built remarkable structures. By trapping grains of sediment and slowly cementing them together with their own metabolic byproducts, certain communities of microbes built up dome-shaped layered mounds called stromatolites. The mounds grew slowly, layer upon layer, over many hundreds or thousands of years. Stromatolites are some of the oldest known fossils of life on Earth. The oldest examples date back about 3.5 billion years. They are found preserved in ancient rocks across many continents: Australia, South Africa, Greenland, Canada. Each ancient stromatolite is a small layered record of microbial life that thrived in a warm, shallow sea long before any complex creature had ever existed. Remarkably, stromatolites still exist today. In a few quiet bays around the world, microbial communities still build the same kinds of layered mounds that their ancient ancestors built billions of years ago. Shark Bay in Western Australia is the most famous of these places. Walking along its shore, you can see living stromatolites just as they would have looked at the dawn of life. For a very long time, more than 2 billion years, life on Earth was almost entirely microbial. There were no plants, there were no animals, there were no fungi, there were no creatures large enough to be seen by an unaided eye. The entire planet was, in some sense, a quiet microbial world, slowly carrying out its slow chemistry beneath warm, shallow seas. During these vast, quiet ages, the microbes did remarkable work. Some of them slowly developed the ability to capture sunlight directly and use it to power their chemistry. They invented photosynthesis. The byproduct of their new metabolism was a gas that, at the time, was strange and unfamiliar to the planet: oxygen. Over hundreds of millions of years, oxygen slowly accumulated in the atmosphere of the early Earth. The change was so gradual that it is sometimes called the Great Oxygenation Event. Even though it took place over a vast stretch of time, the new oxygen-rich atmosphere transformed the planet completely, opening the door to forms of life that had never been possible before. Eventually, around 2 billion years ago, a new kind of cell appeared. These cells had a nucleus. They had organelles. They were vastly more complex than the prokaryotes that had come before them. They were called eukaryotes, true cells. Every plant, animal, fungus, and most other complex life forms on Earth today are descended from these first eukaryotic cells. From these first eukaryotes, life slowly began to grow more complex. Some cells started living together in colonies. Some colonies became permanent. Some permanent colonies became multicellular organisms. The first creatures made of many cells working together. The path toward the diverse life we know today had begun. By around 600 million years ago, the first soft-bodied multicellular creatures had appeared in the ancient seas. These were the Ediacaran biota, strange, gentle, frond-like, and disc-shaped organisms that bore little resemblance to anything alive today. They drifted slowly in shallow seas, feeding by absorbing nutrients from the surrounding water. With no mouths, no eyes, no clear way of life that we fully understand, the Ediacaran creatures lived in a quiet world without predators. There were no animals capable of hunting them, no creatures with jaws or teeth, no swift predators of any kind. The entire ecosystem was a slow, patient world of soft, drifting forms, gently absorbing nutrients from the surrounding seas, with nothing to fear and nothing to disturb the long quiet of the ancient water. These quiet Ediacaran creatures lived for tens of millions of years. They left behind beautiful preserved impressions in ancient sandstones, found today in places like Newfoundland and the Flinders Ranges of Australia. Each impression is a small, ghostly record of a soft creature that drifted through the ancient sea long before any complex animal existed. All of these slow developments, the first prokaryotes, the stromatolites, the rise of oxygen, the appearance of eukaryotes, the first multicellular colonies, the gentle Ediacaran biota, represent more than 3 billion years of slow, patient evolution. The first 3/4 of the history of life on Earth happened entirely without any creature visible to the naked eye, in shallow, warm seas beneath dim, ancient skies. It is humbling to realize how slowly life developed in those early ages. Hundreds of millions of years passed between major innovations. Photosynthesis took perhaps 1 billion years to evolve. Eukaryotic cells took another 1 billion years to appear. Multicellular life took yet another 1 billion years to develop substantial complexity. Life on Earth has, in a quiet way, always been an unhurried project. By around 540 million years ago, after this vast, slow buildup, something remarkable was about to happen. The slow accumulation of complexity, the slow rise of oxygen, the slow evolution of cell types, all of these were quietly preparing the planet for one of the most dramatic moments in the history of life. The Cambrian Explosion was about to begin. Tonight, somewhere on Earth, microbial mats are still slowly growing in warm, shallow bays. Stromatolites are still being built, layer by layer, by living microbes whose ancestors built the first ones billions of years ago. Single-celled organisms are still drifting in countless bodies of water, doing the same slow chemistry they have done since the dawn of life. There is something deeply restful in the thought that the first life on Earth never really stopped. The microbes that thrived in the first warm seas have descendants that thrive today in similar warm seas, doing similar slow chemistry. The thread of life has never been broken. It has only grown more complex, generation after slow generation for 3.5 billion years. Let us drift very gently toward the next great quiet moment in the story of ancient life. Around 540 million years ago, the slow, patient story of life on Earth took a sudden and dramatic turn. After more than 3 billion years of slow microbial development, life began to diversify rapidly into a remarkable variety of new forms. Geologists call this period the Cambrian Explosion, and it represents one of the most important transitions in the entire history of life. The word explosion is somewhat misleading. The Cambrian Explosion did not happen in a single instant. It unfolded over about 20 to 25 million years, still very fast by geological standards, but plenty of time for slow evolution to do remarkable work. During this period, almost all of the major animal body plans we recognize today first appeared in the fossil record. Before the Cambrian, the seas had been filled with the soft Ediacaran creatures and microbial mats. By the end of the Cambrian, the seas were filled with creatures that had hard shells, jointed limbs, complex eyes, predatory jaws, and active lifestyles unlike anything that had come before. The biological world had transformed itself. Among the most famous Cambrian creatures are the trilobites. Trilobites were small to medium-sized animals, related distantly to crabs and insects, with segmented bodies divided into 3 lengthwise sections, hence the name, meaning 3-lobed. They had hard exoskeletons, jointed legs, and complex compound eyes that were among the first true eyes in the history of life. Trilobites were enormously successful. They first appeared in the early Cambrian and persisted in the seas of Earth for nearly 300 million years, surviving long after the Cambrian itself ended. During that vast stretch of time, they evolved into thousands of different species, ranging from tiny millimeter-sized forms to creatures nearly a meter long, occupying every kind of marine habitat. The fossils of trilobites are some of the most beautiful and recognizable in the entire fossil record. Their hard exoskeletons preserved well in ancient sediments, and today their fossils are found on every continent. A trilobite fossil is small enough to hold in your hand, intricate enough to study for a long time, and ancient enough to remind you that it lived in a sea hundreds of millions of years before any human existed. Beside the trilobites, the Cambrian seas held many other remarkable creatures. Anomalocaris, the strange shrimp, was one of the largest predators of its time, sometimes a meter long, with two grasping appendages at the front of its head and large compound eyes. It swam slowly through the warm seas, hunting smaller creatures in the gentle currents. Opabenia was perhaps the strangest of the Cambrian creatures. It had 5 eyes mounted on stalks, a long, flexible proboscis that ended in a small grasping claw, and a body shaped unlike anything alive today. Scientists who first studied its fossils were so puzzled that they laughed in disbelief at how strange it was. The Opabenia represents one of the great evolutionary experiments that did not survive into later ages. Hallucigenia was another Cambrian oddity. It walked on rows of stilt-like legs with rows of long defensive spines on its back. For decades, scientists could not even agree on which way was up. The original reconstruction had it walking on the spines and the legs pointing upward. Eventually, careful re-examination of the fossils revealed the correct orientation. These remarkable creatures are known to us thanks to a few extraordinary fossil sites where Cambrian animals were preserved with unusual completeness. The Burgess Shale in Canada is the most famous of these sites. The fine sediment of an ancient underwater landslide buried entire communities of soft-bodied creatures so quickly that even their soft tissues were preserved in remarkable detail. Other extraordinary Cambrian fossil sites include Chengjiang in China, Sirius Passet in Greenland, and the Emu Bay Shale in Australia. Each of these sites preserves a slightly different glimpse of Cambrian life, with slightly different mixes of species. Together, they give us a remarkably detailed picture of the seas of the early Cambrian. Why did so much new diversity appear in the Cambrian? Scientists are still working out the answer. Some think it was driven by rising oxygen levels in the atmosphere, which allowed more energetic lifestyles. Some think it was driven by the evolution of vision. Once one creature could see, all the others had to evolve eyes or hiding strategies. Some think it was driven by a combination of many slow factors. Whatever the cause, the Cambrian explosion was the moment when complex animal life truly took root on Earth. Almost every major animal body plan we know today, arthropods, mollusks, vertebrates, echinoderms, first appeared in or shortly after the Cambrian. The basic blueprints of animal life were established, and life has been working on variations of those blueprints ever since. Among the new animal groups was a small, soft-bodied creature called Picaia. Picaia was about 5 centimeters long, with a flexible body and a faint internal rod called a notochord running down its length. The notochord was the precursor to the spine. Picaia is one of the earliest known relatives of all vertebrate animals, including in time all fish, all amphibians, all reptiles, all birds, and all mammals. It is humbling to think that all of the great vertebrate animals we know today, every fish in every sea, every bird in every sky, every mammal walking on every continent, every human who has ever lived, descended from creatures very much like Picaia. A small, soft, drifting creature in a Cambrian sea, 500 million years ago, carrying the first faint precursor of the spine that would eventually walk upright on land. The Cambrian Explosion ended slowly, gradually transitioning into the long Ordovician period that followed. By that point, the basic forms of complex life were firmly established. The seas of Earth would never again be as quiet as they had been before the Cambrian. From that point on, the planet would always have complex animal life moving through its waters. Trilobites, anomalocaris, and the other strange Cambrian creatures are all gone now, of course. They have been gone for hundreds of millions of years, but their fossils remain, scattered across the rocks of every continent, telling the story of the great moment when complex life first flourished. Each fossil is a small ancient witness to one of the most important transitions in the long history of our planet. Tonight, in countless museums around the world, trilobite fossils sit quietly in their display cases, waiting to be observed by the next visitor. In countless rocks beneath the soil of every continent, more trilobite fossils still wait to be found, preserved exactly as they were when they died on the floor of an ancient sea 500 million years ago. There is something companionable in the thought of those quiet ancient creatures. They are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their bodies, transformed into stone, still rest patiently in the rocks of the world, ready to teach us about the ancient seas they once inhabited. The Cambrian Explosion may have ended long ago, but its echoes still reach us tonight in the form of small, beautifully preserved fossils. Let the slow story of the Cambrian rest gently in your mind. Trilobites, anomalocaris, and all the other strange ancient creatures are continuing their long preservation in the rocks of the earth exactly as they have for hundreds of millions of years. They do not need our attention to remain. They are simply there, faithful witnesses to a time long past. Let us drift very gently toward the ancient oceans that came after the Cambrian. After the Cambrian Explosion, life continued to diversify in the oceans of the ancient Earth. The next 400 million years would see the seas filled with an extraordinary variety of creatures, many of them strange and unfamiliar by modern standards, all of them part of the slow, patient story of how complex life developed across the long ages. The Ordovician period followed the Cambrian, lasting from about 485 million years ago to 444 million years ago. During this time, the seas were dominated by trilobites, brachiopods, early cephalopods, and a remarkable group of creatures called the eurypterids, sometimes known as sea scorpions. Eurypterids were among the most impressive creatures of the ancient seas. Some of them were quite small, only a few centimeters long, but the largest species reached more than 2 meters from head to tail. They were among the largest arthropods that have ever existed. They glided slowly through ancient seas with paddle-like rear legs, using their large grasping appendages to capture smaller prey. Despite their fearsome name, Eurypterids were not closely related to modern scorpions. They were arthropods, but they belonged to their own distinct lineage. Their closest living relatives are horseshoe crabs, which still inhabit the shallow coastal waters of certain seas today, looking much as their ancestors looked hundreds of millions of years ago. During the Ordovician and the Silurian periods that followed, the first jawless fish appeared in the ancient seas. These early fish were strange and unfamiliar by modern standards. They had no jaws, no teeth, no scales. Instead, they were covered in heavy plates of bony armor. They are sometimes called ostracoderms, meaning shell-skinned. The early jawless fish fed by sucking small particles from the seafloor or by filtering plankton from the water. They could not bite. They could not chew. They were slow, gentle creatures that drifted through the ancient seas, eating whatever soft material their simple mouths could collect. They left behind beautiful, preserved fossils in many parts of the world. Eventually, around 440 million years ago, jaws evolved. The development of jaws was one of the most important innovations in the long history of vertebrate life. Suddenly, fish could bite, chew, hunt, and process food in entirely new ways. Many new lineages of jawed fish appeared, slowly diversifying into the great variety of fish we know today. The Devonian period, from 420 million years ago to 360 million years ago, is sometimes called the Age of Fish because of the extraordinary diversification of fish that occurred during this time. The seas of the Devonian were filled with sharks of various kinds, with armored placoderm fish, with lobe-finned fish, with ray-finned fish, all of them quietly evolving and adapting in their warm, ancient water. The placoderms were one of the most remarkable groups of Devonian fish. They were armored fish with heavy bony plates covering the front of their bodies. Some of them, like Dunkleosteus, grew to enormous size, perhaps 6 meters long, making them some of the largest predators of their ancient seas. Despite their fearsome size, they were not closely related to any fish alive today. Sharks first appeared in the Devonian seas as well, although they looked somewhat different from modern sharks. Early sharks like Cladosolage had streamlined bodies and powerful tails, much like sharks today, but their skeletons and teeth had subtle differences. The basic shark body plan established in the Devonian has been remarkably stable over the past 400 million years. Sharks today are direct descendants of ancient ones. The Devonian seas also held the lobe-finned fish, a group whose descendants would eventually walk onto land and become the first amphibians. Lobe-finned fish had stout, fleshy fins supported by an internal bone structure, more like primitive limbs than the thin rays of modern bony fish. We will return to them in the next chapter when they begin their slow, patient walk onto dry land. Beside the fish, the Devonian seas held many invertebrate creatures we have already met. Trilobites were still abundant, although their diversity was beginning to decline from its peak in earlier periods. Brachiopods, looking somewhat like clams but actually quite distinct from them, dominated the shallow seafloor. Crinoids, also known as sea lilies, formed thick gardens of stalked filter feeders on the deeper bottoms. Crinoids are one of the longest-lived groups of marine creatures. They first appeared in the early Cambrian and are still alive today, although in much reduced diversity. Modern crinoids are mostly deep-sea creatures, drifting in slow currents far below the surface, looking very similar to their ancient ancestors. They are, in some sense, living fossils, relics of the great ancient seafloor gardens of the Paleozoic. The Carboniferous period, from 360 million years ago to about 300 million years ago, brought further developments in the ancient seas. Sharks continued to diversify, evolving into many strange forms. The eurypterids reached their peak diversity. Cephalopods, related distantly to modern octopuses and squid, became increasingly important predators. Among the cephalopods of the ancient seas were the nautiloids, straight-shelled or curved-shelled relatives of the modern chambered nautilus. Some of them grew to enormous lengths, with shells more than 5 meters long. They drifted slowly through the deep waters, propelling themselves with jets of water and capturing small prey with their tentacles. Their fossil shells are among the most beautiful artifacts of ancient seas. After the nautiloids came the ammonites. With their elegant coiled shells, ammonites first appeared in the early Devonian and persisted in the seas of Earth for nearly 400 million years. Their fossils are among the most beautiful and recognizable of all marine fossils. Graceful spirals preserved in stone, ranging from coin-sized to wheel-sized. We will return to them in their own chapter later in our journey. During the long ages of the ancient seas, life slowly underwent many quiet transformations. Some lineages flourished and then declined. Some lineages persisted with remarkable stability. Some lineages adapted into new ecological roles. Some lineages eventually walked onto land. The seas of the Paleozoic era were a vast, slow laboratory of evolution, in which many of the basic patterns of marine life were worked out over hundreds of millions of years. Tonight, on every continent, fossils of these ancient marine creatures rest quietly in the rocks of former seas, in limestone cliffs, in shale outcrops, in road cuts and quarries and beach pebbles. The preserved bodies of trilobites and ammonites and ancient fish wait patiently to be found. They have been waiting in some cases for hundreds of millions of years. There is something steadying in the thought of all those ancient creatures preserved in stone, scattered across every continent. They are part of the long, quiet history of our planet. Their bodies, transformed into rock over hundreds of millions of years, still rest patiently in the earth, ready to remind any patient observer of the vast, deep time that has passed before our own brief moment. Let the slow, ancient seas rest gently in your mind. The trilobites are still there in the rocks. The ammonites are still there in the rocks. The placoderm fish, the eurypterids, the early sharks, all of them are still there in countless preserved forms, waiting patiently in the deep stone of the planet. Let us drift very gently toward the great quiet moment when life first walked onto land. For the first 3 billion years of life on Earth, all living things lived in water. The land was empty. The continents were bare expanses of rock and sand and ancient soil, with no plants, no animals, no living creature of any kind. The shore between sea and land was the boundary of the living world. Beyond that boundary, in the dry air, was a silent, empty world without life. Slowly, very slowly, life began to extend itself onto the bare land. The first colonizers were tiny, microbial mats of cyanobacteria spreading across damp surfaces, simple lichens slowly etching into rock, the earliest land plants taking root in moist sediments along ancient stream banks. The land became green long before it became home to any animal. The first true land plants appeared around 470 million years ago during the Ordovician period. They were small and simple, early relatives of mosses and liverworts, with no true roots, no stems, no leaves of any kind. They grew in moist places along the edges of ancient streams and in shallow temporary pools. Over the next 80 million years or so, plants slowly developed more complex structures. By the early Devonian, some plants had simple stems, primitive vascular tissue for transporting water, and small spore-bearing structures. They were still small. Most were only a few centimeters tall, but they had begun to extend life into spaces above the ground that no organism had occupied before. Once plants had begun to colonize the land, the first land animals followed. The earliest known land animals were small arthropods, relatives of insects and spiders and crustaceans, that walked carefully through the early plant communities. They were tiny, only millimeters long, but they were the first creatures to take their entire lives out of the water. Among these early land arthropods were the first land scorpions, the first centipedes, and the first wingless insects. They lived in moist places under leaves and stones, much like their modern relatives do today. They fed on each other and on bits of plant material that had begun to accumulate as the first true soils slowly developed across the bare land. But the most important development for the future of vertebrate life happened in the water. Among the lobe-finned fish that swam in the shallow ancient seas, certain lineages were slowly developing fins that could be used for a new purpose, pushing against the bottom, supporting body weight in shallow water, and eventually crawling onto bare land. These transitional fish included creatures like Eusthenopteron, a meter-long predator with stout, fleshy fins that could push against the muddy bottom of shallow ponds. Its fins were not yet legs, but they had the beginnings of the bone structure that would eventually become limbs. Its skull contained the early forms of bones that would eventually become the ear bones of mammals. Then, about 375 million years ago, came one of the most famous fossils in all of paleontology, Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik was a half-fish, half-amphibian creature that lived in shallow ancient streams. It had fins like a fish, but those fins contained early versions of the bones we call wrists. It had gills like a fish, but it also had primitive lungs. It had a fish-like body, but it could lift its head independently of its body, a movement only possible if you have a neck. Tiktaalik probably spent most of its life in shallow water, but it was clearly capable of pushing itself partway onto bare mudbanks, perhaps to escape larger aquatic predators or to bask briefly in the air. Its discovery in the Canadian Arctic in 2004 provided one of the clearest pictures we have of how life made the slow, patient transition from water to land. After Tiktaalik came creatures like Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, the earliest true tetrapods, four-limbed vertebrates with proper legs rather than fins. They still lived primarily in shallow water, but they had clear legs with toes. Acanthostega had 8 toes on each foot. Ichthyostega had 7. The number of toes had not yet been standardized at 5. These early tetrapods were not yet fully land-dwelling. They probably spent most of their lives in shallow water, using their limbs to push along the bottom or to clamber over fallen logs and reeds. They breathed primarily through gills, with lungs as a supplemental option. They were transitional creatures, not yet fish, not yet truly land animals, but moving slowly in the direction of full terrestrial life. By the late Devonian and early Carboniferous, the first true amphibians had appeared. They were creatures that could spend significant time on dry land, returning to water only to breed and to keep their skin moist. They had clear limbs with 5 toes. They had ear bones modified from earlier jaw bones. They were the first vertebrate inhabitants of the land, the ancestors eventually of every reptile, bird, and mammal that has ever lived. These early amphibians faced a strange new world. The atmosphere was different from anything that water-dwelling creatures had experienced. Gravity was harder to manage without the buoyancy of water. The body had to find new ways to retain moisture, to hear sound through air, to support its weight, to move forward without floating. Every basic activity had to be reinvented for life on land. And yet, for all the difficulty, life on land offered new opportunities. The land was relatively empty of competition. Plants were spreading rapidly, creating new habitats and new sources of food. Insects and other arthropods were diversifying, providing prey for any animal that could catch them. The slow, patient evolution of land vertebrates had begun, and it would continue for the next 400 million years, eventually producing every land animal we know today. It is humbling to think how much of the modern world traces back to those early walks onto land. Every step you have ever taken, every breath you have ever breathed in the open air, every bird call you have ever heard, every dog that has ever walked beside you, all of these things trace their lineage, ultimately back to small Devonian fish that learned to push themselves onto muddy banks 375 million years ago. Tonight, in countless rocks across the world, fossils of those early landwalkers rest quietly in the stone. Tiktaalik fossils still lie in the Canadian Arctic, where Devonian streambeds were preserved. Ichthyostega fossils rest in Greenland. Acanthostega fossils wait in places that were once shallow ancient swamps. Each fossil is a small ancient witness to one of the great transitions in the history of life. And the descendants of those early walkers are still all around us. Frogs and salamanders and newts continue the amphibian inheritance. Reptiles and birds and mammals continue the broader vertebrate land tradition. The slow, patient walk onto land that began in the Devonian has continued, generation after generation, for nearly 400 million years, producing every familiar animal of the modern world. Let the slow story of the first walkers rest gently in your mind. The transition from water to land was not a single event. It was a slow, patient movement, taking tens of millions of years, involving countless transitional forms. It happened so slowly that no individual creature would have known it was happening. Each generation simply lived its slightly different life, and over vast time, the entire vertebrate world moved onto dry land. Tonight, somewhere on Earth, an amphibian is sitting quietly in damp moss, breathing the air through soft skin, resting on the same kind of substrate its ancestors first encountered hundreds of millions of years ago. The slow, patient inheritance of land life continues exactly as it has through every quiet night. Let us drift very gently toward the great forests of the Carboniferous, where giant insects flew under the largest trees Earth had yet known. After the early walkers had emerged onto land, the world entered an extraordinary period of plant growth. The Carboniferous period, from about 360 million years ago to 300 million years ago, takes its name from the vast deposits of carbon, coal, that formed during this time from the burial of immense quantities of plant material. The Carboniferous was, in many ways, the great age of plants on Earth. During the Carboniferous, much of the land surface of Earth was covered by enormous swampy forests. The plants that built these forests were not the trees we know today. Modern trees, oaks, pines, maples, would not appear for another 200 million years. The Carboniferous forests were built from giant relatives of horsetails, club mosses, and ferns, scaled up to enormous sizes. Lepidodendron was one of the most impressive Carboniferous trees. It was a giant club moss that grew to heights of more than 30 meters, with a trunk a meter wide at its base. Its bark was patterned in a distinctive diamond-shaped pattern from the scars left by fallen leaves. It is sometimes called the scale tree because of these distinctive markings. The lepidodendron forests covered vast portions of the ancient continents. Sigularia was another giant Carboniferous tree, similar in size to lepidodendron but with a different pattern of leaf scars on its trunk. Its name means seal-bearing after the seal-like marks on its bark. Sigularia and lepidodendron together formed the dominant canopy of the great coal forests, casting deep green shade over the swampy ground beneath. Beneath the giant club moss canopy grew vast thickets of giant horsetails called calamites. Modern horsetails are small, wispy plants found in damp ditches, but calamites grew to heights of 15 meters or more, with thick, segmented stems like the bamboo of today. Calamite groves filled the wet lowlands of the Carboniferous, their feathery green branches arching over the still ancient waters. Tree ferns also grew in great numbers in the Carboniferous forests. Some of them reached heights of 10 or 12 meters, with broad lacy fronds spreading from a slender central trunk. Tree ferns still exist today in some tropical regions, in New Zealand, in Australia, in parts of Central and South America, but their ancient relatives were far more numerous and more widespread, dominating large stretches of the Carboniferous landscape. All of these giant plants together produced enormous quantities of organic material as they died and fell into the swampy ground. Much of their material was buried before it could fully decay. Over millions of years, these accumulated plant remains were compressed and transformed into the vast deposits of coal that humans have mined for centuries. Most of the coal in the world today is the buried legacy of Carboniferous forests. The Carboniferous atmosphere was unusual. Because so many plants were growing and not fully decaying, oxygen levels in the air rose to levels much higher than today, perhaps 35% oxygen compared to 21% now. The high oxygen content had remarkable effects on the animals that lived in the Carboniferous forests, allowing some of them to grow to extraordinary sizes. The most famous of the giant Carboniferous animals was Meganura, a giant dragonfly relative with a wingspan of nearly 70 centimeters, bigger than many modern birds. Meganura glided slowly through the spaces between the giant club mosses, hunting smaller insects with large grasping legs. It was one of the largest insects that has ever existed, made possible only by the high oxygen levels of its time. Arthropleura was another remarkable Carboniferous giant. It was a giant millipede-like creature, sometimes more than 2 meters long, that crawled slowly through the leaf litter of the swamp forests. Despite its enormous size, Arthropleura was probably a peaceful detritivore, feeding on decaying plant material rather than hunting other animals. It was the largest land invertebrate that has ever lived. Pulmonoscorpius, a giant land scorpion, also reached impressive sizes in the Carboniferous, perhaps 70 centimeters long. Like Arthropleura, it benefited from the high oxygen levels of the time, which allowed its simple breathing system to support a much larger body than would be possible today. It hunted other insects and small early amphibians in the dim light beneath the giant tree canopy. The first true reptiles also evolved during the Carboniferous. Reptiles were a major innovation in vertebrate life, the first vertebrates with eggs that could be laid on dry land, with thick skin that retained moisture, with bodies fully adapted to terrestrial life. The earliest reptiles were small lizard-like creatures called Hylonomus, only 20 centimeters long, that lived in the rotting stumps of fallen lepidodendron trees. The development of the amniotic egg, an egg with a watertight shell that could be laid on dry land, was one of the most important innovations in vertebrate evolution. It freed reptiles from the need to return to water for reproduction, the way amphibians still must do. With this innovation, reptiles could spread into truly dry environments far from any water, opening vast new territories to vertebrate life. Beside the giant insects and the early reptiles, the Carboniferous swamps held many large amphibians, descendants of the early tetrapods we met in the previous chapter. Some of these Carboniferous amphibians grew to substantial sizes, 2 or 3 meters long, and lived crocodile-like lives in the still warm waters of the swamp forests. They were apex predators of their watery world. Sharks continued to thrive in the Carboniferous seas, evolving into many strange forms. Stethacanthes, with its remarkable anvil-shaped dorsal fin, swam slowly through the warm, shallow seas. Helicoprion, with its bizarre spiral whorl of teeth, hunted softer prey in the deeper waters. The Carboniferous seas were a peaceful, slow garden of strange shark experiments. Eventually, around 300 million years ago, the Carboniferous period gave way to the Permian. The great coal forests slowly dwindled as climates dried. The giant insects gradually disappeared as oxygen levels fell back toward more modern levels. The high oxygen world that had supported so many extraordinary giants slowly closed, and the next great chapter of life on Earth began. Tonight, the deep coal seams of the world still hold the buried legacy of Carboniferous forests. In Pennsylvania and West Virginia, in northern England and southern Wales, in the Donbass of Ukraine and the basins of China, vast deposits of coal still rest in the ground. the compressed remains of giant club mosses and tree ferns that grew on Earth 300 million years ago. Each lump of coal you might encounter in the world today is, in some real sense, a small piece of an ancient Carboniferous forest. The plants that built it lived 300 million years ago. Their bodies, transformed slowly into stone-like fuel, still contain the chemical traces of the sunlight that fell on them when the world was young. Coal is quite literally fossilized sunshine. There is something humbling in that thought. The energy stored in those ancient forests has been waiting in the deep ground for hundreds of millions of years. The slow, patient work of giant club mosses, capturing sunlight under a primordial sky, has rested patiently in the earth for almost unimaginable spans of time, until our recent ages began to extract it. Let the slow Carboniferous forests rest gently in your mind. The giant club mosses are gone. The towering horsetails are gone. The meter-wide dragonflies have not flown for 300 million years. But their slow legacy remains in the coal beneath the ground, in the diversification of land plants and animals that the Carboniferous launched, in the slow, patient story of how life filled the empty land. Tonight, somewhere in the world, modern descendants of those Carboniferous plants are still growing. Small horsetails grow in damp ditches, looking like miniature versions of their giant ancestors. Tree ferns still extend their broad fronds in tropical forests. Club mosses still creep across forest floors. The slow, patient inheritance of Carboniferous plant life continues, even after 300 million years. Let us drift very gently toward the next great quiet age in the story of ancient life. After the great Carboniferous forests began to dry, the world entered the Permian period from about 300 million years ago to 252 million years ago. The climate became drier and more seasonal in many places. The vast coal swamps of the Carboniferous gave way to broader continental landscapes, with deserts in some regions and great floodplains in others. The Permian was the great age of a group of vertebrate animals called the synapsids. The synapsids are sometimes called mammal-like reptiles. Although that name is somewhat misleading, they were not really reptiles in the modern sense, and they are best described as the ancient lineage that eventually gave rise to all true mammals, including ourselves. They dominated land ecosystems for nearly 50 million years before the first dinosaurs appeared. One of the most famous early synapsids was Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon was a sail-backed predator that lived in the early Permian about 290 million years ago. It grew to lengths of more than 3 meters, with a tall sail of skin stretched over long bony spines rising from its back. The sail probably helped it regulate its body temperature, absorbing morning sunlight to warm itself for the day's activity. But despite its appearance, Dimetrodon was not a dinosaur. It was a synapsid, more closely related to mammals than to any reptile. Dimetrodon lived nearly 40 million years before the first true dinosaur appeared. The world it inhabited was very different from the dinosaur world we usually imagine. Drier, more open, dominated by mammal ancestors rather than the great archosaurs to come. Edaphosaurus was another famous sail-backed synapsid of the early Permian. Unlike the predatory Dimetrodon, Edaphosaurus was an herbivore, with leaf-shaped teeth designed for processing tough plant material. The two creatures often lived in the same habitats, with Dimetrodon hunting the slower Edaphosaurus among others, although both shared the distinctive sail-backed appearance that has made them famous. As the Permian progressed, the synapsids continued to evolve. Around the middle of the Permian, a more advanced group called the therapsids appeared. Therapsids were intermediate between the early sail-backed synapsids and the true mammals that would eventually evolve from them. They had more upright limb postures, more complex teeth, and many other features that pointed toward the eventual evolution of mammals. Among the most impressive therapsids were the gorgonopsids, large saber-toothed predators that hunted across the late Permian landscapes. Gorgonopsids had powerful skulls with elongated canine teeth, similar in some ways to the much later saber-toothed cats, but evolved entirely independently. Some gorgonopsids reached lengths of more than 3 meters, making them among the largest predators of their time. The Dicenodonts were another remarkable group of late Permian therapsids. They were heavily built herbivores, often pig-sized or larger, with two prominent tusks projecting from their upper jaws. Dicenodonts were among the most numerous and successful land vertebrates of their time, filling many of the herbivore roles that later would be filled by mammals or large dinosaurs. By the late Permian, the synapsids had developed many features we now associate with mammals. Some had whiskers, suggesting a sense of touch through facial hair. Some had complex teeth, differentiated into incisors, canines, and molars. Some appeared to have had warm-blooded metabolisms, a degree of parental care, and other characteristically mammalian traits. They were, in a real sense, mammals in the making. Beside the synapsids, the Permian also held many other interesting creatures. Reptiles continued to diversify, including some that would eventually give rise to dinosaurs and to modern reptiles. Amphibians continued to thrive in wetter regions. Insects diversified into many new groups, including the first true beetles. The land ecosystems of the Permian were rich and varied, even if dominated by the synapsids. In the seas of the Permian, the long Paleozoic story continued. Trilobites had declined from their earlier diversity but were still present. Brachiopods continued to dominate shallow seafloors. Crinoids formed extensive gardens in deeper waters. Sharks of various kinds continued to swim in the warm seas. Ammonites had become important predators in the open ocean. Then, about 252 million years ago, came the Great Permian Triassic Extinction event, the largest extinction in the history of life on Earth. Over a relatively short geological span, perhaps a few 100,000 years, an enormous proportion of marine and terrestrial species disappeared. Estimates suggest that 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land vertebrate species vanished. The cause of the Permian Triassic extinction is still debated by scientists. The leading theories involve massive volcanic outpourings in what is now Siberia, the Siberian traps, which released vast quantities of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere over a long span of time. The resulting climate disruption appears to have made conditions difficult for the existing ecosystems, leading to widespread loss of species. The trilobites, those ancient survivors of the Cambrian, finally vanished in the Permian Triassic extinction. After more than 250 million years of swimming through the shallow seas of Earth, they disappeared from the living world. Their fossils remain, scattered across the rocks of every continent, but the lineage itself ended in the slow catastrophe of the late Permian. The synapsids were also severely affected. Most lineages of gorgonopsids, dicynodonts, and other therapsids disappeared. A few small synapsid lineages survived into the Triassic, however, and from those quiet survivors would eventually emerge the first true mammals, small nocturnal creatures very different from the great gorgonopsids and dicynodonts of the late Permian. From those small survivors of the Permian extinction, the long mammalian story would slowly begin. The lineage that produced gorgonopsids and dicynodonts was largely cut short, but the lineage that would eventually produce mice and elephants and whales and humans began its slow, patient development in the early Triassic, hidden beneath the ascendant new world of the archosaurs. The end of the Permian also marked the end of the long Paleozoic era. The great age of trilobites, eurypterids, and synapsids was over. The next era, the Mesozoic, would belong to a different cast of characters. Reptiles would rise to dominance. Dinosaurs would eventually emerge and rule for 160 million years. The mammals would have to wait hidden in the underbrush for their own time to come. Tonight, in countless museums and rocks across the world, fossils of the great Permian synapsids rest quietly. Dimetrodon skeletons stand assembled in display halls. Gorgonopsid skulls fill paleontology collections. Dicynodont tusks and bones rest in drawers and cabinets, waiting to be studied by the next patient researcher. Each fossil is a witness to a vanished age. It is humbling to think that all of us, every human alive tonight, and every mammal that has ever lived, are descended from a small lineage of survivors that crept through the ruins of the Permian world. The great gorgonopsids and dicynodonts are extinct, but their distant cousins, the small surviving synapsids, became the ancestors of every mammal we know today. Let the slow Permian world rest gently in your mind. The sail-backed Dimetrodon basking in the morning sun, the saber-toothed gorgonopsids stalking through dry savannas, the tusked dicynodonts grazing in floodplain forests. All of them are gone now, but their patient bodies, transformed into stone, still rest in the rocks of the world, faithful records of a world that came before our own. Let us drift very gently toward the great seas of the Mesozoic, where marine reptiles ruled the warm waters of the dinosaur world. After the great Permian extinction, life slowly recovered. The Mesozoic era, from about 252 million years ago to 66 million years ago, opened a new chapter in the history of life on Earth. On land, the dinosaurs would eventually rise to dominance, but in the seas, an entirely different cast of characters took the leading roles. The Mesozoic was the great age of marine reptiles. During the Mesozoic, several groups of reptiles independently returned to the sea after their ancestors had spent many millions of years on land. They evolved streamlined bodies, paddle-like limbs, and various adaptations for an aquatic life. Together, these marine reptiles dominated the oceans for 180 million years, occupying many of the ecological roles that whales and dolphins fill in the seas today. The ichthyosaurs were among the first of the great Mesozoic marine reptiles to evolve. They appeared in the early Triassic, shortly after the Permian extinction, and quickly developed remarkably fish-like bodies. Their original four limbs evolved into paddle-like flippers. Their tails developed vertical fins, much like modern fish. Their bodies became sleek and streamlined. They were, in many ways, dolphins of their time. Despite their fish-like appearance, ichthyosaurs were reptiles. Descended from land-dwelling ancestors, they breathed air through nostrils on the top of their heads. They gave birth to live young in the water rather than laying eggs on land. They had large eyes for hunting in deep waters. Some species grew to lengths of more than 15 meters, comparable to a modern sperm whale. Ichthyosaurs were extraordinarily successful for many millions of years. They diversified into many species, occupying many marine niches. Some were small, others were enormous. Some were specialized for hunting fish in shallow seas, others for diving deep to hunt squid. Their fossils are found in many parts of the world, often beautifully preserved with their soft tissues outlined in fine detail. The plesiosaurs were another major group of Mesozoic marine reptiles. They evolved from a different reptile lineage than the ichthyosaurs and looked entirely different. Plesiosaurs had broad bodies, four large flipper-like limbs, and either very short or very long necks. The famous long-necked plesiosaurs, with their small heads on serpentine necks, are among the most distinctive of all ancient creatures. Some plesiosaurs had unbelievably long necks, with as many as 76 vertebrae, far more than any animal alive today. They probably moved their long necks slowly through the water, picking off small fish and other prey with their relatively small heads. Other plesiosaurs had short necks and large jaws, hunting larger prey in a different ecological style. The two body plans are sometimes called plesiosauromorphs and pleosauromorphs. Some of the short-necked pliosaur-style plesiosaurs grew to enormous sizes. Pliosaurs like Leopleurodon and Kronosaurus reached lengths of more than 10 meters, with massive heads and powerful jaws. They were among the apex predators of the Mesozoic seas, hunting large prey with great patience. Their massive teeth marks have been found in the bones of other large marine reptiles. Toward the end of the Mesozoic, a third major group of marine reptiles appeared, the mosasaurs. Mosasaurs evolved from terrestrial lizards that gradually returned to the sea, similar to how ichthyosaurs had done much earlier. They had elongated bodies, paddle-like limbs, and powerful tails for propulsion. The largest mosasaurs reached lengths of more than 15 meters, rivaling the largest ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Mosasaurs are particularly important because they are closely related to modern monitor lizards and snakes. Their lineage shows that the basic body plan of squamate reptiles, the lizards and snakes, could adapt remarkably well to marine life. Some mosasaur species evolved features very similar to modern sea snakes, including the ability to absorb seawater and excrete excess salt through specialized glands. Beside these reptilian giants, the Mesozoic seas held many other interesting creatures. Sea turtles evolved during this period, with some species reaching enormous sizes. Archelon was nearly 5 meters long, the largest sea turtle that has ever lived. Marine crocodiles also evolved, including some that became fully aquatic with paddle-like limbs and sharp teeth. Ammonites continued to flourish in the Mesozoic seas, reaching their peak diversity during this time. We will spend the next chapter exploring them in more detail. Belemnites, squid-like cephalopods with internal bullet-shaped shells, were also abundant, swimming in great schools through the warm seas, hunting small fish and other prey. The first true bony fish, the ancestors of all modern bony fish, also diversified extensively in the Mesozoic. They developed many of the body plans we recognize today, evolving into the great variety of fish that fill modern seas. Sharks continued their long success, evolving many of the body plans we know in modern sharks. The Mesozoic seas were a remarkable mix of strange ancient forms and recognizable modern lineages. All of these creatures together formed the rich marine ecosystems of the Mesozoic. The seas of the dinosaur age were teeming with life, every bit as diverse and complex as the seas of any other era. While the great dinosaurs walked on land, an entirely separate world of giant marine reptiles and ammonites and sea turtles was thriving in the warm Mesozoic oceans. The end of the Mesozoic 66 million years ago brought the famous mass extinction event that ended the long reign of the dinosaurs on land. The marine reptiles were also severely affected. The ichthyosaurs had actually become extinct earlier, around 90 million years ago, but the plesiosaurs and mosasaurs both vanished at the end of the Cretaceous, along with most of the great cephalopod groups. After the extinction, the seas slowly recovered. New creatures filled the empty ecological roles. Whales eventually evolved from land-dwelling mammals, returning to the sea to fill many of the niches that ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs had once occupied. Sharks continued their unbroken success. Sea turtles, having survived the extinction, slowly diversified into the species we know today. Tonight, in museums around the world, the great skeletons of Mesozoic marine reptiles hang quietly in display halls. Long-necked plesiosaurs stretch across ceilings. Streamlined ichthyosaurs rest in glass cases. Giant archelon turtles fill entire rooms. Each skeleton is a small ancient witness to the rich watery world of the Mesozoic Sea. In rocks across many continents, fossils of these ancient marine creatures still wait to be found. The Jurassic coast of England has produced some of the finest ichthyosaur and plesiosaur specimens. The chalk cliffs of Kansas hold many mosasaur fossils. The shales of Holzmaden in Germany have produced beautifully preserved ichthyosaurs with their soft tissue outlines visible. Each fossil is a small piece of the ancient seas. It is humbling to imagine those ancient warm seas filled with creatures so different from anything alive today. Long-necked plesiosaurs gliding slowly through warm, shallow waters. Giant plesiosaurs hunting in the deeper waters. Streamlined ichthyosaurs cruising at the surface. Mosasaurs slipping through the kelp. All of them gone now. All of them preserved only in stone, all of them part of the slow, patient story of life on Earth. Let the slow, ancient seas rest gently in your mind. The marine reptiles that once dominated the oceans have been gone for 66 million years, but their preserved bodies, transformed into stone, still rest patiently in the rocks of every continent. They are not forgotten. They are simply waiting in their quiet stone forms for the next patient observer to find them. Let us drift very gently toward the elegant ammonites, the most beautiful spirals of the ancient seas. Among all the creatures that have ever lived in the seas of Earth, few have left behind fossils as beautiful or as recognizable as the ammonites. Their elegant coiled shells, often preserved in remarkable detail, have fascinated naturalists and paleontologists for centuries. The slow, patient story of the ammonites stretches across nearly 400 million years, encompassing some of the most remarkable creatures of the ancient sea. Ammonites were cephalopods, relatives of modern octopuses, squid, and the chambered nautilus. They first appeared in the early Devonian, about 400 million years ago, evolved from earlier straight-shelled nautiloid ancestors. Over the next 400 million years, they would diversify into thousands of species, occupying nearly every kind of marine habitat. The basic ammonite design was the coiled shell. Inside the shell, the soft body of the animal lived in the outermost chamber. The earlier chambers, separated by complex internal walls called septa, were filled with gas and liquid that the animal could regulate to control its buoyancy. By adjusting the gas levels in its inner chambers, an ammonite could rise or sink in the water column, much like a modern submarine. The walls between the chambers, the septa, were not simple flat partitions. They had complex folded edges that interlocked with the inside of the shell wall in patterns called sutures. The complexity of these sutures provided structural strength to the shell, allowing ammonites to survive at considerable depths in the ocean. Different ammonite species had different suture patterns, and these patterns are now used by paleontologists to identify and date fossils. The soft body of an ammonite, like the body of a modern nautilus, included a head with eyes and tentacles, a mouth at the center of the tentacles, and a muscular foot or hood near the opening of the shell. Ammonites probably swam by jet propulsion, drawing water into their mantle cavity and then expelling it through a siphon, much like modern squid and octopuses still do today. Ammonites came in an extraordinary range of sizes. The smallest were only a few millimeters across, barely visible without a magnifier. The largest reached enormous sizes. Parapuzotia, from the late Cretaceous, had a shell more than 2.5 meters across, the size of a small tractor wheel. The diversity of ammonite sizes suggests they filled many different ecological roles in the ancient sea. Ammonites came in an even greater range of shell shapes. Most had the classic flat-coiled spiral that gives them their characteristic appearance, but some had loose open coils, like a tube wrapped around itself. Some had irregular twisted shells called heteromorphs. Some had cone-shaped shells. The variety of forms suggests that ammonites experimented widely with different ways of being a coiled cephalopod. During the Mesozoic era, ammonites reached their peak diversity. The seas of the dinosaur age held thousands of ammonite species, swimming through nearly every marine habitat. They were one of the most successful and abundant groups of large marine animals during the Mesozoic. Their fossils are so common in some Jurassic and Cretaceous rocks that they form the dominant fossil signature of those ages. Ammonites were probably hunted by all the great marine predators of the Mesozoic, pliosaurs, mosasaurs, ichthyosaurs, large fish, and other ammonites all preyed on smaller ammonites. The bite marks of mosasaur teeth have been found in many ammonite shells, sometimes preserving the precise pattern of the predator's tooth row in remarkable detail. In some places, ammonite fossils are so abundant that entire layers of rock are made of nothing but their compressed shells. Such layers are called ammonite beds or ammonite limestones. They preserve the ancient seas in remarkable detail, fossilized communities of dozens or hundreds of species, all preserved together where they once lived. Each layer is a window into a single moment of ancient marine life. The colors of living ammonite shells were probably as varied as the colors of modern seashells. Most ammonite fossils today appear gray or brown, the original colors having faded over millions of years, but occasionally, well-preserved fossils still show traces of the original color patterns, bands, stripes, spots, and other markings that would have been visible on the swimming animal. Sometimes, in fortunate circumstances, the chambers of ammonite fossils filled with mineral solutions that crystallized into beautiful gemstone-like materials. The most famous example is ammonite, a rainbow-colored gem material formed from ammonite shells preserved in certain Cretaceous rocks of Alberta, Canada. The ammonite is the only gemstone with biological origin formed from the actual shells of long-dead ammonites. In some places, even more remarkable preservation has occurred. Ammonite fossils preserved in certain shales have retained traces of the soft body that lived inside the shell. From these rare preservations, paleontologists have learned about the muscular foot, the tentacles, the digestive system, and other soft features of these ancient creatures. Each rare specimen is a small window into a body plan we cannot otherwise observe. Throughout their long history, ammonites went through several cycles of diversification and decline. They were nearly wiped out by the Permian Triassic extinction, with only a few lineages surviving into the Mesozoic. They diversified again, reaching new peaks of variety. They were affected by smaller extinction events. They diversified again. Each cycle filled the seas with new ammonite forms. Then, 66 million years ago, came the Great Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the same event that ended the long reign of the dinosaurs. The ammonites, after surviving so many earlier extinctions, did not survive this one. The entire group disappeared from the seas. Their fossil record stops abruptly at the boundary, marking the end of an unbroken 400 million year story. It is curious that the ammonites disappeared while their close relative, the chambered nautilus, survived. The nautilus is still alive today in the western Pacific, looking remarkably similar to its ancient ancestors. Why did the nautilus survive when the ammonites did not? Scientists are still working out the answer, but it may have to do with deep-sea egg-laying habits that protected nautilus eggs from surface disturbances. Tonight, in countless museums around the world, ammonite fossils sit quietly in their display cases. In countless rocks of countless quarries, more ammonite fossils still wait to be found. They are some of the most beautiful natural objects ever created, elegant spirals preserved in stone, silent witnesses to the rich seas of the Mesozoic age. People have been finding ammonite fossils for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians associated them with the god Amun, after whom they were eventually named. Medieval Europeans called them snake stones and believed they were petrified serpents. Native Americans of the Great Plains regarded them as sacred objects. The beautiful spirals have spoken to many cultures across many ages about the deep mystery of life and time. Each ammonite fossil you might encounter today is, in some real sense, the preserved body of a creature that swam in an ancient sea. Some of them are 66 million years old, some are 200 million years old, some are 300 million years old. To hold one in your hand is to hold a small fragment of a vanished world, preserved with extraordinary patience by the slow chemistry of the earth. Let the slow ammonites rest gently in your mind. The thousands of species, the hundreds of millions of years, the countless beautiful spiral shells preserved in stone, all of them are part of the long, quiet story of life in the ancient seas. The ammonites may be gone, but their inheritance is preserved forever in the rocks of the earth. Tonight, in some quiet drawer in some quiet museum, an ammonite fossil from the Jurassic Age is resting gently. It has been there undisturbed since whatever recent year it was excavated and brought into the museum. Before that, it had been resting for 150 million years in the rock where it died. The slow, patient preservation continues, exactly as it has for unimaginable spans of time. Let us drift very gently toward the great flying reptiles of the Mesozoic skies. While the great dinosaurs walked on land and the marine reptiles ruled the seas, a third group of remarkable reptiles took to the skies. The pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to evolve true powered flight. They appeared in the late Triassic, about 225 million years ago, and dominated the air for over 150 million years before disappearing at the end of the Mesozoic. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, despite often being grouped with them in popular imagination. They belong to a separate reptile lineage that evolved alongside the dinosaurs. They are not ancestors of birds either. Birds evolved from a different group of small dinosaurs much later. Pterosaurs were their own unique experiment in vertebrate flight, distinct from the bird lineage that would eventually take to the skies. The pterosaur wing was an extraordinary structure. Unlike a bird wing, which is supported by the entire forelimb, or a bat wing, which is supported by extended fingers, the pterosaur wing was supported primarily by a single enormously elongated fourth finger. The flight membrane stretched from the tip of this elongated finger back along the body to the leg. It was a unique solution to the problem of vertebrate flight. The earliest pterosaurs were relatively small. Eudimorphodon, one of the first known pterosaurs, had a wingspan of about a meter. They had long tails, often with a small diamond-shaped vein at the tip that probably helped with steering. They had small heads with sharp teeth, suggesting they fed on insects and small fish near the warm ancient coasts. Throughout the Jurassic period, pterosaurs continued to diversify. Many species developed long beaks, some lined with sharp pointed teeth, others toothless. They evolved a remarkable variety of head crests, bony projections rising from the skull that probably served for communication and species recognition. The crests came in many shapes: narrow blades, broad fans, hooked spikes, and many other forms. The Cretaceous period brought the truly enormous pterosaurs. By the late Cretaceous, the largest pterosaurs had wingspans of more than 10 meters, comparable to a small modern airplane. Quetzalcoatlus, named after the feathered serpent god of Aztec mythology, was one of these giants. Its wingspan reached nearly 11 meters, and when standing on the ground it was as tall as a giraffe. Quetzalcoatlus and the other giant pterosaurs were among the largest flying animals that have ever lived. They flew using slow, patient wing beats, soaring on rising air currents over the late Cretaceous landscapes. Their long necks and beaks suggest they may have hunted small dinosaurs and other land animals, much as modern storks hunt fish in shallow waters. Recent research has shown that even the largest pterosaurs could probably fly powerfully, despite their enormous size. Their bones were hollow but reinforced with internal struts, much like modern bird bones. Their flight muscles were enormous. They could probably take off from a standing start by pushing off with all four limbs at once, then beating their wings to lift their bodies into the air. Pterosaurs were probably warm-blooded. They had a covering of fine fur-like filaments called pycnofibers across much of their bodies, similar in some ways to the down feathers of modern birds. The pycnofibers would have insulated their bodies and helped maintain the high body temperatures needed to power their flight muscles. Pterosaurs were almost certainly more like birds in their physiology than like modern reptiles. Beyond the famous giants, there were many smaller pterosaur species. Some had specialized lifestyles. Pterodastro had hundreds of long bristle-like teeth in its lower jaw that it probably used to filter small organisms from the water, similar to the way modern flamingos feed. Tapichara had an enormous head crest that may have been used for communication or display. Each pterosaur species had its own particular ecological niche. Pterosaurs are known to us thanks to a number of remarkable fossil sites where they have been preserved with exceptional detail. The Solnhofen limestone of Germany, the same site that has produced the famous Archaeopteryx fossils, has yielded many beautifully preserved pterosaur skeletons. The Liaoning fossil beds of China have produced pterosaurs with their pycnofibers still visible, along with countless other Mesozoic creatures. Some of the most extraordinary pterosaur fossils preserve eggs, embryos, and even soft tissues. From these rare preservations, paleontologists have learned that pterosaurs hatched from eggs with leathery shells, much like modern reptile eggs. The hatchlings were probably able to fly almost immediately, much like modern megapode bird. Each new fossil has added to our slowly developing picture of pterosaur biology. By the late Cretaceous, the diversity of pterosaurs had begun to decline. Many of the smaller pterosaur lineages had disappeared, possibly outcompeted by the increasingly diverse early birds. By the end of the Cretaceous, only the giant azhdarchids, the lineage of Quetzalcoatlus, remained as the dominant flying reptiles. The other pterosaur groups had quietly faded from the sky. Then, 66 million years ago, the Great Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event ended the long pterosaur story. The same event that killed the non-bird dinosaurs and the marine reptiles also wiped out the last pterosaurs. After more than 150 million years of uninterrupted flight, the pterosaur lineage came to an end. The skies were left to the birds. Birds had evolved from a small group of theropod dinosaurs during the Jurassic. They had coexisted with pterosaurs for many millions of years, both groups sharing the air. Birds, however, survived the Great Extinction event in some form. From those small surviving birds, the great variety of modern birds slowly diversified, eventually filling many of the ecological roles that pterosaurs had once filled. It is poignant to think of the long pterosaur lineage. For 150 million years, they were the lords of the air, the largest flying creatures that had ever existed. Then, in a relatively brief geological moment, they were gone. Their preserved bodies remain only in the rocks, scattered across many continents, mute witnesses to a vast and beautiful chapter of vertebrate flight. Tonight, in countless museums around the world, pterosaur skeletons hang quietly in display halls. Long-necked azhdarchids stretch across high ceilings. Crested pteranodons rest in glass cases. Tiny early pterosaurs rest in fossil collections. Each skeleton is a small ancient witness to the ancient skies they once filled. In rocks across many continents, pterosaur fossils still wait to be found. The chalk cliffs of Kansas hold many pteranodon fossils. The shales of Solnhofen still yield occasional new specimens. The fossil beds of Liaoning continue to produce remarkable preservations. Each new fossil adds to our slowly growing picture of these vanished masters of the ancient skies. And the descendants of those early Cretaceous birds are still all around us. Every bird call you hear at dawn, every flock that crosses the morning sky, every gull soaring above a coast, all of them are descendants of the small dinosaurs that survived the Great Extinction. The lineage that competed with pterosaurs for the ancient sky has continued generation after generation into our own time. Let the slow pterosaur sky rest gently in your mind. The great Quetzalcoatlus soaring on rising thermals over Cretaceous plains, the crested pteranodons gliding above ancient seas, the small early pterosaurs darting between primordial coastal trees, all of them gone now, but all of them part of the slow, patient story of vertebrate life learning to fly. The skies are quieter now, in the absence of those enormous winged reptiles, but the skies are still full of life. Birds continue what pterosaurs once began. The basic principles of vertebrate flight, worked out independently by both lineages, still carry creatures across the morning skies of every continent. Let us drift very gently toward the small first mammals, the patient ancestors hidden beneath the dinosaur world. During the long age of the dinosaurs, while the great reptiles dominated land, sea, and sky, a small, inconspicuous group of creatures was quietly developing in the underbrush. These were the early mammals, descendants of the synapsid lineage that had survived the Permian extinction. For nearly 160 million years, mammals lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs, mostly small, mostly nocturnal, mostly waiting patiently for their own time to come. The first true mammals appeared in the late Triassic period, around 225 million years ago. They evolved from a group of advanced therapsid synapsids called the cynodonts. The transition was so gradual that there is no single moment when therapsids became mammals. Instead, there was a slow accumulation of mammalian features over many millions of years, and at some point, the descendants had crossed the line into being recognizably mammalian. The earliest mammals were small. Most were the size of mice or shrews, only a few centimeters long. They had small bodies covered with fur, large eyes for nocturnal vision, sensitive whiskers, and acute hearing. They were almost certainly warm-blooded, with active metabolisms that required them to eat constantly to fuel their small, fast body. Why were early mammals so small? The answer probably has to do with the dinosaurs that dominated their world. Large body sizes were already occupied by the various dinosaur lineages. The ecological roles of large land predators and large land herbivores were already filled. The only roles available to mammals were those that the dinosaurs could not fill efficiently: small, nocturnal, agile, ground-dwelling, and tree-dwelling roles. So early mammals specialized in being small. They became expert at moving through small spaces, hiding under logs, climbing trees, burrowing into the ground. They evolved sharp teeth for cracking insect shells, sharp claws for digging and climbing, and complex senses for navigating in the dim light of dawn and dusk and night when the dinosaurs were less active. Some early mammals developed remarkable specializations even at small size. Castorocauda from the Middle Jurassic was a small beaver-like mammal that lived in and around water. It had a flat, scaly tail like a modern beaver, webbed feet for swimming, and dense waterproof fur. It was one of the first mammals to occupy a fully aquatic ecological role more than 160 million years ago. Volaticotherium, also from the Jurassic, was a small gliding mammal, much like a modern flying squirrel. It had a thin membrane stretched between its limbs that allowed it to glide between trees in ancient forests. It is one of the earliest known examples of mammalian flight, and it shows that early mammals were already exploring a remarkable variety of ecological roles. Repenomamus was an unusually large early mammal about the size of a modern badger. It was discovered in the early Cretaceous fossil beds of China, and one specimen had the bones of a small dinosaur preserved in its stomach. This famous find showed that some early mammals were large enough and aggressive enough to prey on small dinosaurs, even in the heart of the dinosaur age. During the Cretaceous, the first mammals split into the major lineages we know today. The monotrem's, the lineage that includes the modern platypus and echidnas, diverged from the other mammals. The marsupials and the placentals split apart, going on to dominate Australia and the rest of the world respectively. But by the end of the Cretaceous, all the major branches of the mammalian family tree had been established. Then, 66 million years ago, the Great Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event changed everything. The dinosaurs that had dominated the world for 160 million years vanished almost entirely. Only the bird lineage survived. The pterosaurs and the great marine reptiles also disappeared. The world was suddenly empty of its giant rulers, leaving vast ecological space available for the small surviving creatures. The mammals were among the most successful survivors of the Great Extinction. Their small size, their varied diets, their burrowing habits, and their nocturnal lifestyles had probably all helped them weather the disaster. As the world slowly recovered in the Paleocene, the mammals found themselves in a strange new situation, a world without dinosaurs, with all the great ecological roles available for them to fill. Over the next 60 million years, The mammals diversified explosively. They evolved into many new forms, occupying nearly every ecological niche on land. Some grew large. The early Cenozoic produced enormous mammals like the long-necked Indracotherium, the largest land mammal that has ever existed, standing more than 5 meters tall. Others stayed small but specialized in entirely new ways. Some mammals returned to the sea, becoming the whales and dolphins. The earliest whales, animals like Pakicetus and Ambulocetus, were four-legged creatures that hunted along ancient coastlines, gradually adapting to fully aquatic life over many millions of years. By the late Eocene, fully aquatic whales like Basilosaurus were swimming through the ancient sea. Other mammals took to the air. Bats evolved during the Eocene, becoming the only mammals capable of true powered flight. The earliest known bat fossils from about 50 million years ago look remarkably similar to modern bats, already fully equipped with the wing membranes and acute hearing that make their nocturnal lifestyle possible. Primates also evolved during this period. The earliest known primates were small tree-dwelling creatures, similar to modern lemurs in many ways. Over the next 60 million years, they would diversify into the great variety of monkeys, apes, and eventually humans that exists today. The deep ancestry of every human alive tonight stretches back through these small early Cenozoic primates, through Cretaceous mammals, through Mesozoic survivors, all the way back to the synapsid survivors of the Permian extinction. Mammals continued to diversify throughout the Oligocene, the Miocene, the Pliocene, and finally into the Pleistocene. The continents drifted into roughly their modern positions. The climates cooled, grasslands spread, new mammal lineages adapted to these changing conditions. By the late Pliocene, many of the modern mammal families we know today had appeared: horses, deer, elephants, cats, dogs, monkeys, and many others. The slow, patient inheritance of the early mammals continued generation after generation for 160 million years before the dinosaurs vanished, and another 66 million years afterward. From small mouse-sized survivors of the Triassic to the great variety of mammals we know today, the lineage has continued without break, slowly producing every mammalian creature alive on Earth tonight. Tonight, all over the world, mammals continue this slow inheritance. Bats are flying through the dark. Whales are swimming through deep oceans. Mice are creeping along forest floors. Lions are resting under acacia trees. Bears are sleeping in mountain dens. Elephants are walking quietly across savannas. Primates are climbing in tropical canopies. Each one is a continuation of the long mammalian story. And among them, in their own quiet way, are the humans. Every human alive tonight is part of this same long mammalian inheritance. The patient ancestors that survived the dinosaur age, that crept through the Cretaceous underbrush, that diversified during the Cenozoic, they are the deep ancestors of every person sleeping under every roof in the world tonight. Let the slow mammalian story rest gently in your mind. The small Triassic survivors, the patient Mesozoic underbrush dwellers, the Cenozoic diversifiers, all of them are part of the long, quiet inheritance that continues in your own body, in every breath you take, in every heartbeat that quietly carries you towards sleep. There is something deeply restful in the thought that you, sleeping tonight, are the latest expression of a slow, patient lineage that has continued for 225 million years. The same warm-blooded, fur-covered, small young-bearing inheritance that began in the late Triassic has continued generation after slow generation into your own quiet rest tonight. Let us drift very gently toward the great Ice Age megafauna, the giant mammals that ruled the more recent world. Of all the chapters in the long story of ancient life, the most recent and the most familiar belongs to the Great Ice Age. The Pleistocene epoch, from about 2.5 million years ago to about 11,000 years ago, was the time of the last ice ages, the time when great ice sheets advanced and retreated across the northern continents, and when the world was inhabited by some of the largest and most impressive land mammals that have ever existed. During the Pleistocene, the climate of Earth oscillated between cold glacial periods and warmer interglacial periods. During the glacial periods, enormous ice sheets covered much of North America, northern Europe, and northern Asia. The Laurentide ice sheet at its maximum extent was more than 3 kilometers thick and covered an area larger than Antarctica is today. The world was in many ways a much colder place than the one we know. Beyond the ice sheets, the colder Pleistocene world supported a remarkable assemblage of large mammals adapted to Ice Age conditions. These animals are sometimes called the megafauna, the great animals of the Pleistocene. They included woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, glyptodonts, and many other extraordinary creatures. The woolly mammoth was perhaps the most famous of all Ice Age mammals. Mammuthus primigenius, the woolly mammoth, was a relative of modern elephants, adapted to the cold steppe environments of northern Eurasia and North America. It had a thick coat of long, shaggy fur, a layer of fat several centimeters thick beneath its skin, small ears to minimize heat loss, and curved tusks that could be more than 4 meters long. Woolly mammoths lived in herds across the vast mammoth steppe, a cold, dry grassland that stretched from Western Europe through Siberia and across the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska and Yukon. The mammoth steppe was the largest single ecosystem on Earth during the late Pleistocene, supporting enormous populations of mammoths and other grazing mammals. Beside the mammoths walked the woolly rhinos, Calodonta antiquitatis. The woolly rhino was a relative of modern rhinoceroses, similarly adapted to Ice Age conditions with a thick coat of fur. Like mammoths, woolly rhinos lived across the mammoth steppe, grazing on the cold grasses of late Pleistocene tundra. They had 2 horns on their snouts, the larger of which could be more than a meter long. In North America, an even larger relative of modern elephants, the Columbian mammoth, lived south of the great ice sheets. Columbian mammoths were taller than woolly mammoths, reaching heights of nearly 4 meters at the shoulder. That they were less fully adapted to cold conditions, lacking the thick fur of woolly mammoths, and they ranged across the warmer parts of North America during the Pleistocene. The giant ground sloths were among the most distinctive of Pleistocene mammals. Megatherium, the largest of the giant ground sloths, was native to South America. It was about the size of a modern elephant, weighing perhaps 4 tons, and it stood on its hind legs to feed on the upper branches of trees. Despite its enormous size, it was a peaceful herbivore, slowly browsing on leaves with its long tongue. Glyptodonts were also South American giants. Related distantly to modern armadillos, glyptodonts were heavily armored herbivores about the size of small cars, with shells made of fused bony plates. Some species had spiked tails that they probably used to defend themselves. They lived in herds across the South American grasslands, slowly grazing on the abundant Pleistocene vegetation. The saber-toothed cats were among the most famous Pleistocene predators. Smilodon, the most well-known saber-tooth, lived across the Americas during the late Pleistocene. It had two enormously elongated upper canine teeth, sometimes more than 20 centimeters long, that gave it its distinctive appearance. Despite the dramatic teeth, Smilodon was probably an ambush predator, similar in lifestyle to modern lions. Dire wolves, Canis dirus, were among the largest wolves that have ever existed. They were similar in size to modern gray wolves, but more heavily built, with stronger jaws and larger teeth. They hunted in packs across late Pleistocene North America, taking down large prey like horses, bison, and young mammoths. Their fossils are particularly common at the La Brea tar pits in California. In Europe, the cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, was an enormous bear, larger than modern brown bears, that hibernated in mountain caves during the long Pleistocene winters. Cave bear bones have been found in great numbers in caves across Europe, suggesting that many bears died in their hibernation dens during particularly harsh winters. Cave bear teeth and skulls were apparently sometimes collected by Neanderthals. In Australia, the Pleistocene supported its own remarkable megafauna. Diprotodon was the largest marsupial that has ever existed, a wombat-like creature about the size of a small rhinoceros. The thylacoleo, or marsupial lion, was a powerful predator with retractable claws and bone-crushing teeth. Giant kangaroos like Procoptodon stood more than 2 meters tall, browsing on leaves rather than grazing. New Zealand had its own remarkable Pleistocene fauna. Giant moas, flightless birds taller than humans, walked through ancient New Zealand forests. The largest, Dinornis robustus, stood more than 3 meters tall and weighed perhaps 230 kilograms. They were the largest birds in their part of the world, filling many of the ecological roles that mammals filled elsewhere. Many of the Pleistocene megafauna survived until very recently, geologically speaking. Most of the large Ice Age mammals lasted into the Holocene, the warm interglacial period that began about 11,000 years ago. Many of them disappeared in a wave of extinctions between about 14,000 and 8,000 years ago. The exact causes of these extinctions are still debated by scientists. Some scientists believe the late Pleistocene extinctions were caused primarily by climate change as the ice ages ended. Some believe they were caused by the spread of human hunters across the world. Some believe a combination of climate change and human pressure was responsible. The extinctions are particularly notable in places that humans had only recently reached: the Americas, Australia, and various islands. Remarkably, some Pleistocene megafauna survived in isolated populations long after the main extinction wave. Woolly mammoths persisted on Wrangel Island in the Russian Arctic until about 4,000 years ago, meaning that the last mammoths were still alive when the Egyptian pyramids were already standing. They were the last representatives of a lineage that had begun nearly 6 million years earlier. Today, in the cold permafrost of Siberia and Alaska and Yukon, the bodies of woolly mammoths are sometimes found preserved in remarkable detail. Some have soft tissues, hair, and even stomach contents preserved after tens of thousands of years in the frozen ground. Each find is a remarkable window into the late Pleistocene world. We will return to these preserved mammoths in the next chapter. Tonight, in countless museums around the world, the skeletons of Pleistocene megafauna stand quietly in display halls. Mammoth tusks curve through gallery spaces, saber-toothed skulls grin from glass cases, dire wolf jaws rest in fossil collections, giant sloth claws fill drawers in research collections. Each fossil is a small recent witness to the great cold world of the late Ice Age. It is poignant to think that all these great Pleistocene mammals lived during the same time as our own species. Our ancestors walked among mammoths and saber-toothed cats and giant sloths. They painted them on cave walls, they hunted some of them, they lived alongside them for many tens of thousands of years. The Pleistocene world is the world that our deep ancestors knew firsthand. Let the slow Ice Age world rest gently in your mind. The mammoth herds grazing on cold steppes, the saber-toothed cats resting in tall grasses, the giant sloths browsing on tree branches, the dire wolves moving in slow, patient packs, all of them gone now, all of them recent enough to feel almost present, all of them part of the very last chapter in the long story of ancient life. Let us drift very gently toward the living fossils, the ancient creatures that have continued, almost unchanged, into our own time. Some ancient creatures have not become extinct. Some lineages have persisted, almost unchanged, for hundreds of millions of years, surviving every great extinction event and continuing into our own time. These creatures are sometimes called living fossils, modern animals and plants that closely resemble their ancient ancestors and that represent unbroken threads of inheritance reaching back to deep geological. The chambered nautilus is one of the most famous living fossils. Nautiluses are cephalopods, relatives of octopuses, squid, and the extinct ammonites we explored earlier. They have an elegant coiled shell with internal chambers separated by smooth septa, and they live in the deep waters of tropical Pacific and Indian Oceans. Nautiluses today look very similar to their ancestors of more than 400 million years ago. The chambered nautilus has survived several mass extinction events that wiped out its more famous relatives, the ammonites. While ammonites disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous, nautiluses continued. They survived because they laid their eggs in the deep ocean, where the surface disturbances of the Great Extinction had less effect. Today, only a few species remain, all living in the western Pacific. The horseshoe crab is another remarkable living fossil. Despite its name, it is not actually a crab. It is more closely related to spiders and scorpions. Horseshoe crabs have existed in essentially their current form for nearly 450 million years. They lived in the seas during the Cambrian Explosion, walked the seafloors of the Carboniferous, and continue today in shallow coastal waters of the Atlantic and parts of Asia. Horseshoe crabs are particularly remarkable because they have survived almost without change while everything around them has transformed completely. The continents have rearranged themselves twice. Most marine ecosystems have changed beyond recognition. The trilobites and eurypterids that once shared their seas have vanished. But the horseshoe crab continues, walking patiently along ancient shorelines, doing essentially what it has always done. Each spring, horseshoe crabs gather in enormous numbers along certain Atlantic beaches to lay their eggs. The Delaware Bay supports one of the largest such gatherings in the world. The eggs are an important food source for migrating shorebirds, particularly the red knot, which times its migration to coincide with horseshoe crab spawning. The two species have been linked in this way for many millions of years. The coelacanth is perhaps the most famous of all living fossils. Coelacanths are large, lobe-finned fish that were thought to have been extinct since the late Cretaceous, 66 million years ago. Then, in 1938, a fishing trawler in South Africa caught a strange, large fish that turned out to be a living coelacanth. The discovery was one of the most extraordinary biological finds of the 20th century. Today, two species of coelacanth are known. They live in deep underwater caves along the coasts of East Africa and Indonesia, descending to depths of more than 700 meters during the day and rising to shallower waters at night to hunt. They are large fish up to 2 meters long, with the distinctive lobed fins that give their group its name. Their fins move alternately when they swim, in a pattern that resembles the way four-legged land animals walk. The coelacanth's relatives, the lobe-finned fish, were the ancestors of all four-legged land animals. So in some sense, the coelacanth is a living echo of the lineage that eventually walked onto land 400 million years ago. The cousin lineage stayed in the sea and continued almost unchanged, while one lineage walked onto land and gradually became all the amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals we know today. Among the plants, the ginkgo tree is one of the most famous living fossils. Ginkgo biloba is the only surviving member of an entire group of plants, the ginkgophytes, that was widespread during the Mesozoic era. Ginkgos lived alongside the dinosaurs. Their fossil leaves, found in many ancient rock layers, look almost exactly the same as the leaves of modern ginkgo trees. Ginkgos were nearly extinct in the wild by historical times, with possibly only a few small populations surviving in remote parts of China. They were preserved, however, in Buddhist temple gardens where Chinese monks had cultivated them for centuries. From these temple gardens, ginkgos spread back into wider cultivation, and today they are grown in cities and parks around the world. They are remarkably tolerant of urban pollution. Ginkgo leaves have a distinctive fan shape with parallel veins. In autumn, they turn a brilliant yellow before falling. The trees are dioecious, meaning male and female reproductive structures grow on separate trees. Female ginkgo trees produce fleshy seeds that have a distinctive smell, while male trees do not. Most ginkgos planted in modern landscapes are male, to avoid the seeds. Cycads are another remarkable group of ancient plants. They look superficially like palms or tree ferns, but they are not closely related to either. Cycads were widespread during the Mesozoic. The era is sometimes called the Age of Cycads, as well as the Age of Dinosaurs, because cycads were such an important part of the plant community. Today, only about 300 species of cycads remain, scattered across tropical and subtropical regions. Tuataras are remarkable living fossils from the reptile world. They look superficially like lizards, but they belong to an entirely separate ancient reptile lineage that diverged from the lizard lineage about 250 million years ago. Tuataras live only on a few small islands off the coast of New Zealand, where they have continued their ancient way of life. Lampreys and hagfish are jawless fish that have continued essentially unchanged since the Devonian period, more than 350 million years ago. They are descendants of the early jawless fish that swam in the Paleozoic seas before the evolution of jaws transformed vertebrate life. Today, lampreys and hagfish are the only surviving representatives of the ancient jawless fish lineage. Sturgeons and paddlefish are also remarkably ancient. They diverged from other bony fish lineages more than 200 million years ago and have continued in essentially their ancient form ever since. Sturgeons are large, slow-growing fish that live in rivers and coastal waters across the northern hemisphere. They have been around long enough to have shared rivers with the dinosaurs. The woolly pine is one of the most surprising recent discoveries among living fossils. The woolly pine had been known only from fossils, with the last fossil specimens dating from about 2 million years ago. Then, in 1994, a small population of living woolly pines was discovered in a remote canyon in Australia. The trees had survived undetected in their isolated home for the entire 2 million years since they had supposedly become extinct. Living fossils remind us that extinction is not the only outcome for ancient lineages. Some creatures find ways to persist, sometimes by retreating to specialized habitats, sometimes by being so well adapted to their basic ecological role that no later innovation has displaced them. Each living fossil is a slow, patient survivor, carrying its ancient inheritance into the modern world. To watch a living fossil today is to glimpse the deep past directly. When you observe a horseshoe crab walking along an Atlantic beach, you are seeing a creature whose ancestors walked similar beaches 300 million years before any human existed. When you stand under a ginkgo tree, you are standing under a kind of plant that fed dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. The deep past is still here in these quiet, patient survivors. Tonight, all over the world, living fossils continue their ancient inheritance. Nautiluses are drifting through deep tropical waters. Horseshoe crabs are walking along quiet beaches. Coelacanths are resting in deep underwater caves. Ginkgo trees are standing in temple gardens and city parks. Tuataras are warming themselves on cool stone. Each one is a small ancient witness continuing without break into the modern world. Let the slow living fossils rest gently in your mind. They are with us still. The horseshoe crabs, the nautiluses, the coelacanths, the ginkgos, the tuataras, they continue the ancient story not in stone but in living flesh and living wood. The deep past is not entirely past. It is also present in these slow, patient survivors in their small, quiet way. Let us drift very gently toward the creatures preserved in amber and ice, the ancient lives held perfectly across vast spans of time. Most fossils are preserved as stone, the original organic material slowly replaced by mineral, leaving behind a stone copy of the ancient creature. But occasionally, in rare special circumstances, ancient life is preserved in entirely different ways, held in amber, frozen in permafrost, mummified in caves encased in tar. These special preservations give us our most vivid windows into the ancient world, sometimes preserving soft tissues, colors, and even DNA across vast spans of time. Amber is one of the most beautiful and remarkable preservation media. Amber begins as resin, a sticky aromatic substance produced by certain trees, particularly conifers, as a defense against insects and infection. Resin slowly drips down tree trunks and pools on the ground. Over many millions of years, buried resin slowly hardens and chemically transforms into amber, a hard, translucent fossil substance. As resin drips down a tree trunk, it sometimes catches small insects and other organisms that happen to pass by. Once trapped in the sticky resin, the small creatures cannot escape. The resin slowly engulfs them, sealing them away from oxygen and decay-causing organisms. Over millions of years, as the resin hardens into amber, the trapped creatures are preserved with extraordinary detail. Amber preserves small organisms with detail that no other fossil method can match. Individual hairs are preserved. Fine wing membranes are intact. Tiny features of leg joints, antennae, and eyes are visible under a microscope. Some amber specimens preserve creatures so perfectly that they look as if they had died only yesterday, even though they may be 100 million years old. Among the most famous amber deposits is the Baltic amber from northern Europe. Baltic amber dates from about 44 million years ago during the Eocene epoch. It contains a remarkable diversity of preserved insects and other small organisms, including many species no longer found in modern Europe. Baltic amber has been collected by humans for thousands of years, valued both as jewelry and as a window into the ancient past. Even older amber comes from Myanmar in the late Cretaceous deposits dating from about 99 million years ago. Burmese amber has produced some of the most extraordinary discoveries in recent years, including a small dinosaur tail with feathers preserved, a baby snake, an ancient bird, and many other vertebrates. The discovery of vertebrates in amber is much rarer than insects, but provides incredible windows into ancient ecosystems. Permafrost provides another extraordinary preservation medium. Permafrost is permanently frozen ground found in the Arctic and subarctic regions of the world. When animals die in places that subsequently became permanently frozen, their bodies can be preserved with remarkable completeness, sometimes including soft tissues, fur, internal organs, and even stomach contents. The most famous permafrost discoveries involve woolly mammoths. Over the centuries, many partial and complete mammoth carcasses have been recovered from the permafrost of Siberia, Alaska, and Yukon. Some of these mammoths are tens of thousands of years old. Some are remarkably well preserved with skin, fur, and internal organs all visible. In 2007, a baby woolly mammoth named Lyuba was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Lyuba was about a month old when she died, more than 40,000 years ago. Her body was preserved almost perfectly. Her skin, her fur, her internal organs, and even her stomach contents were intact. Her last meal was still visible in her digestive tract. She is one of the most complete mammoth specimens ever found. In 2013, another remarkable mammoth was discovered, Yucca, an adolescent female mammoth that had died about 39,000 years ago. Yucca's preservation was so good that liquid blood was found in her body cavity fully 39 millennia after her death. The discovery raised hopes that ancient DNA might be recovered intact, possibly enabling future de-extinction efforts. Beyond mammoths, the permafrost has produced many other extraordinary preservations. Steppe bison, woolly rhinos, cave lions, ancient horses, all have been recovered with varying degrees of soft tissue preservation. In 2018, a perfectly preserved cave lion cub named Spartak was found in Siberia, with its fur and even its whiskers intact after about 30,000 years in the frozen ground. In 2024, a perfectly preserved baby saber-toothed cat was discovered in the Siberian permafrost, a Homotherium cub that had died about 35,000 years ago. The cub had its full coat of fur intact, its sharp little teeth visible, and even pads on its small feet preserved. It was the first time the soft anatomy of a saber-toothed cat had ever been observed by science. Tar pits provide yet another remarkable preservation medium where natural petroleum slowly seeps to the surface. It can form pools of sticky tar that trap unwary animals. Over thousands of years, the tar can accumulate enormous numbers of preserved bones, sometimes including the bones of predators that came to feed on already trapped prey and themselves became stuck. The La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles are the most famous of these tar deposits. They have preserved an extraordinary collection of late Pleistocene animals: saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, mammoths, ground sloths, ancient horses, and many other species. The tar preserves bones beautifully, even penetrating into the marrow cavities and preserving small structural details that would be lost in other fossil environments. The collection of fossils from La Brea is so vast that it includes more than 3 million individual specimens, representing more than 600 species of animals and plants. The tar pits offer one of the most complete pictures of any late Pleistocene ecosystem in the world. Each fossil from La Brea is a small witness to the rich animal community of Southern California about 30,000 to 50,000 years ago. Caves provide additional preservation environments. The cool, dry conditions inside many caves can preserve animal remains for tens of thousands of years. Cave bear bones, in particular, are abundant in many European caves where the bears died during hibernation. Some caves contain so many bear remains that they are sometimes called bear pits. Some caves preserve much older remains. The Naracoorte caves in Australia contain fossils of late Pleistocene Australian megafauna, including giant marsupials and other extraordinary creatures. The caves of South Africa have preserved extensive collections of early human ancestors and the animals they lived alongside, providing some of our most important evidence of human evolution. Mummification can preserve ancient remains in dry environments. The dry caves of the southwestern United States have preserved giant ground sloth dung, mummified bodies of small animals, and even occasional human remains from periods many thousands of years ago. The dry conditions arrest the normal processes of decay, allowing soft tissues to be preserved across many millennia. Each of these special preservation methods gives us a different window into the ancient world. Amber preserves small organisms with extraordinary detail. Permafrost preserves large mammals with their soft tissues intact. Tar pits preserve bones from late Ice Age ecosystems. Caves preserve animals from many different periods. Together, these special preservations dramatically supplement what the ordinary stone fossil record can tell us about ancient life. It is remarkable to consider that creatures who died tens of thousands of years ago can still be observed today, with their fur and their stomach contents and their last expressions preserved. The slow chemistry of cold and dry and resin and tar has held these ancient lives across spans of time that strain human imagination, ready for our modern observation. Let the slow special preservations rest gently in your mind. The mammoths in their permafrost, the insects in their amber, the saber-toothed cats in their tar, the cave bears in their stone caverns. All of them are still with us, in their preserved forms, ready to tell their slow, patient stories to any patient observer who wishes to learn from them. Let us drift very gently toward the closing of our long journey through the deep past. As we approach the closing of our slow journey, it is worth pausing to consider what it has meant to spend tonight in the company of so many ancient creatures. We have visited the first life on Earth 3.5 billion years ago. We have walked through the strange Cambrian seas. We have followed the slow steps of life onto land. We have considered the Carboniferous Giants, the Permian synapsids, the Mesozoic marine reptiles, the ammonites, the pterosaurs, the first mammals, the Ice Age megafauna, the living fossils, and the special preservation. Each of these chapters has been a small window into a vast story. The slow, patient story of life on Earth is older and stranger and more diverse than any single human lifetime can fully appreciate. The creatures we have visited tonight represent only a tiny fraction of the species that have ever lived. Most ancient species are entirely unknown to us, leaving no fossil record at all. And yet, even what we do know is enough to inspire deep wonder. Trilobites swimming in Cambrian seas, giant club mosses growing in Carboniferous swamps, sail-backed Dimetrodon basking in the morning sun, plesiosaurs gliding through warm Mesozoic waters, ammonites floating in their elegant spirals, Quetzalcoatlus soaring on Cretaceous winds, mammoths walking across cold tundras, all of them gone, all of them part of the slow, patient story. There is a kind of comfort in knowing that life on Earth has been a continuous story for 3.5 billion years. The thread of life has never been broken. From the first stromatolites to the latest creatures alive tonight, every living thing on Earth is connected by an unbroken chain of ancestry stretching back to the dawn of life. We are all part of the same long, quiet inheritance. Many ancient creatures have left no living descendants. The trilobites died out, the eurypterids died out, the dinosaurs, except for the birds, died out, the pterosaurs, the marine reptiles, the giant Pleistocene mammals, all of them are gone, with no descendants alive today. Their lineages are simply ended, preserved only in the rock. But other ancient lineages continue. Sharks have been swimming in the seas of Earth for 400 million years. Horseshoe crabs have been walking along ancient shorelines for nearly that long. Crocodiles, in essentially their modern form, lived alongside the dinosaurs. Cycads have been growing in tropical forests since the Mesozoic. The Earth is full of slow, patient continuities reaching back unimaginably far in time. The fossils of all the lost lineages still rest patiently in the rocks of the Earth. Trilobite fossils still lie in Cambrian shales on every continent. Ammonite fossils still rest in Mesozoic limestones. Mammoth bones still wait in the permafrost of Siberia. The deep past is not lost. It is simply preserved in countless small, careful records, ready for any patient observer to find. Each fossil is, in some sense, a quiet message from deep time. It says, "I lived. I was here. I was part of the world." The trilobite preserved in stone 300 million years ago is sending us the same message that every creature, including ourselves, will eventually leave behind. The ancient creatures and the modern creatures are all part of the same long story, separated only by time. Tonight, while you rest, the ancient creatures continue their slow preservation. In museum drawers around the world, trilobite fossils sit quietly. In Siberian permafrost, mammoth bodies wait in the cold. In Burmese amber, tiny insects from the age of dinosaurs are still perfectly preserved. In every quiet rock formation across every continent, the patient witnesses to the deep past continue to wait. And the living descendants of the ancient lineages also continue. Horseshoe crabs are walking along Atlantic beaches as they have for 400 million years. Coelacanths are drifting in deep Indian Ocean caves. Tuataras are warming themselves on cool New Zealand stone. Ginkgo trees are standing in temple gardens, their fan-shaped leaves looking exactly as they looked in the Mesozoic. The deep past is also alive in these slow, patient survivors. The thought of all this slow, patient inheritance is, in some way, a deep source of peace. Whatever happens in any single human life, however brief our individual moments, we are part of a vast and ancient and beautiful story. The story has been going on for 3.5 billion years. It will continue for a long time after us. We are simply one quiet moment within its long unfolding. There is something deeply restful in being part of such a long, quiet story. The slow, patient ancestors who survived the Permian extinction, the small mammals who waded through the dinosaur age, the early primates who developed in the Cenozoic forests, all of them, in their own ways, were quietly preparing the path that has led generation after slow generation to the present moment when you're reading these words and slowly drifting toward sleep. Let the slow, ancient story continue gently in the back of your mind as you rest. The thread of life has never been broken. The patient inheritance continues. The ancestors are with us, in our bones, in our cells, in our quiet sleeping bodies tonight, exactly as they have been for hundreds of millions of years. Tonight, somewhere in the world, a horseshoe crab is laying its eggs on a quiet beach, exactly as its ancestors did during the time of the dinosaurs. Somewhere, a coelacanth is drifting through deep dark water, exactly as its lineage has done for hundreds of millions of years. Somewhere, a ginkgo leaf is being carried gently by an autumn wind, exactly as ginkgo leaves were carried in Mesozoic forests. And tonight, somewhere in the rocks of every continent, fossils of vanished ancient creatures are continuing their slow, patient preservation. They have been there for hundreds of millions of years. They will continue to be there for hundreds of millions of years more. The deep past is preserved, faithful and unhurried, exactly as it has been since long before any human existed. Let the slow ancient inheritance rest gently in your mind. There is no hurry. The deep past is not going anywhere. The ancient creatures continue in their fossils and in their living descendants. They have been waiting for us. They will continue to be there, slowly and patiently, through the long, quiet hours of every night. There is a kind of gratitude that the slow ancient world deserves, even from those of us who never think about it from one day to the next. The first life, the Cambrian creatures, the early walkers on land, the Carboniferous Giants, the Permian synapsids, all the ancient ancestors who quietly built the path that has led to our own brief moment. The slow, patient, deep past is our inheritance, freely given, asking nothing of us. Tonight, let that gratitude rest gently within you. There is no need to express it. There is no need to remember it tomorrow. It is enough simply to feel for a quiet moment the slow, patient warmth of being part of a vast ancient story that has been continuing faithfully and unhurried since long before any of us were born. And let us drift now very gently toward the closing of our long journey through the deep past. The journey is nearly complete. There is only the gentle ending left. Let the patient ancient inheritance be enough for tonight. Thank you for trusting your night to this slow voice. The Circadian Institute exists because there is a need in the late hours for stories that do not demand anything. Subscribing keeps that need answered. Each week, a new slow journey through the ancient world of life on Earth, made for sleep. The journey we have taken tonight slowly through the deep, slow story of ancient life on Earth has reached its quiet conclusion. We have visited the first stromatolites and microbial mats. We have followed the explosive diversification of the Cambrian. We have walked through ancient seas with trilobites and eurypterids. We have stepped onto land with the first tetrapods. We have moved through the Carboniferous forests, the Permian synapsids, the Mesozoic marine reptiles, the ammonites, the pterosaurs, the first mammals, and the Ice Age megafauna. We have considered the living fossils still continuing their ancient inheritance today. We have visited the special preservations that hold ancient bodies across vast spans of time. We have thought about the threads that connect deep past to present, about the quiet, unbroken inheritance that has continued for 3.5 billion years. Each chapter has been a small window into the slow, patient story of life on Earth. The journey has been slow on purpose. Deep time itself moves slowly. The slow, patient evolution of life is not in a hurry. There has been no rush, and there is no rush now. Whatever you have absorbed, whatever you have not absorbed, whatever you have heard, and whatever you have drifted past, all of it is exactly right. The night has been holding the journey for you. As we close, let yourself rest. Let the bed hold you. Let the pillow hold your head. Let the breath continue on its own without your supervision. The work of the night, like the slow work of deep time, is being done without your effort. You do not need to participate, you only need to allow. The ancient creatures in their preserved forms around the world are still resting in the rocks tonight. The trilobites are still preserved in their stones. The ammonites are still resting in their limestones. The mammoths are still waiting in the permafrost. The amber-trapped insects are still suspended in their golden resin. The slow preservation continues, faithful and unhurried, exactly as it has for vast spans of time. Somewhere, a horseshoe crab is walking quietly along an Atlantic beach, continuing the lifestyle that its ancestors began 400 million years ago. Somewhere, a coelacanth is resting in a deep Indian Ocean cave, exactly as its lineage has rested for hundreds of millions of years. Somewhere, a ginkgo leaf is settling gently to the ground, exactly as ginkgo leaves have settled in autumn forests since the Mesozoic. Somewhere, a tuatara is warming itself on a cool New Zealand stone, carrying the inheritance of an ancient reptile lineage that diverged from the lizards 250 million years ago. Somewhere, a nautilus is drifting through deep tropical water, sole survivor of the great cephalopod groups that once filled the Mesozoic seas. Each living fossil is a small, slow miracle of continued inheritance. And tonight, you and the ancient inheritance are both alive in the same world, on the same patient breathing planet. There is a kind of companionship in that. The deep past does not know you. The trilobites in their rocks cannot recognize that you are aware of them, and yet here you both are, continuing the quiet work of being part of the long story of life on Earth. The patience of deep time is perhaps a useful patience to take into sleep. The way the trilobites swam slowly in the Cambrian, the way the ammonites drifted in their elegant spirals, the way the mammoths walked unhurried across cold steppes, the way the slow, patient evolution of life proceeded across hundreds of millions of years. Let some of that patient quality be present in your own slow drift toward sleep. There is no rush to fall asleep. There is no specific moment that must be reached. Sleep arrives the way dawn arrives over an ancient landscape, the way new species slowly emerge across deep time, the way fossils slowly form in patient sediment, gradually, gently, without anyone announcing it. It does not need to be summoned, it only needs to be allowed. If your eyes are still open, allow them to close now. There is nothing more to see. There is nothing more to learn. There is nothing more to remember. The ancient creatures will continue their slow preservation whether you are watching or not. The living fossils will continue their ancient inheritance. The night will continue to deepen. The trilobites are still preserved in their stone, somewhere on countless quiet shorelines. The mammoths are still resting in the patient permafrost of the far north. The ammonite spirals are still elegant in their limestone matrices. The amber-trapped insects are still suspended in their golden resin. All of them are continuing their slow preservation, exactly as they have for millions of years. Let the breath continue in and out. The deep past continues too, in its own slow way. The fossils slowly rest in their rocks. The living fossils slowly carry on their ancient lifestyles. The slow inheritance of life slowly unfolds across deep time. The slow, patient breath of life on Earth has been doing this for 3.5 billion years. Tonight, you and the ancient inheritance are both alive in the same world, on the same patient breathing planet. There is no other body in the universe that does this exactly the way yours does. There is no other time in the long history of the world exactly like this one. And yet you are part of a long, ancient story that has been continuing for billions of years, and that will continue for billions more. Sleep deeply now. The night will hold you. The ancient creatures will continue their slow preservation. Tomorrow, the slow inheritance of life will still be at work. The fossils will still be in the rocks. The living fossils will still be in their habitats. The patient unfolding of life on Earth will continue exactly as it has for vast spans of time. Until then, drift slowly, drift completely, drift into the slow, patient world of ancient life, where the trilobites rest forever in their stones, where the mammoths wait quietly in their permafrost, where the slow, patient inheritance continues on its own, whether anyone is watching or not. The night is long. Deep time is patient. The ancient creatures are quietly preserved. There is room for you to rest here, in the quiet company of the deep past, for as long as you need. Let your body soften. Let your breath soften. Let your mind soften. The way ancient sediment slowly softens around a fossil over millions of years. There is no rigid shape you need to keep tonight. The body knows how to rest. It has been doing this every night of your life. The deep past continues. The ancient creatures continue. Tomorrow, the sun will rise over 1,000 fossil sites and 1,000 living fossil habitats, and the slow, patient inheritance of life will be there, exactly as it has been every dawn for billions of years. The world is steady. The patient ones continue. Let your sleep be one of them. Good night. Outside this video, the night is still going. The trilobites are still preserved in their stone, somewhere on countless quiet shorelines. The mammoths are still resting in the patient permafrost of the far north. The living fossils, coelacanths, horseshoe crabs, ginkgos, are still continuing their ancient inheritance, exactly as they have for hundreds of millions of years. Tomorrow comes when it comes. Until then, sleep deeply. Good night from the Circadian Institute.